Aloha and welcome back to SUP FM. My name's Simon Hutchinson, and in the SUP FM podcast every week I chat to people who can inspire and add to your experience of stand-up paddleboarding. What you'll find in every episode is a conversation with someone who's either done something incredible in SUP or who can offer you some learning, insights and help which can add something to your time on the water. We want to say a big thank you to the sponsors of this show, Starboard. Starboard is the leading innovator in SUP and has a huge history in board and paddle design. And way back in episode 71, I talked to Sven Rasmussen, the creator of the brand. He started by producing windsurfing boards in 1994, and the success of his innovative designs led to the brand developing into the market leader in only 10 years. Starboard got behind stand-up paddling early and has supported the sport ever since. And they continue to innovate on the environmental front, and they improve and push the boundaries of design and functionality, which makes their boards and their paddles perfect for the weekend warriors like me, as well as the elite level competitors. And you can find out more about Starboard through their website, which is linked to in the show notes. You can catch up with SUP FM podcast in plenty of places, including Instagram and Facebook. But if you wanted to keep it old school, then please sign up to our SUP FM email newsletter, which goes out with a whole lot of value-added updates. And if you do sign up, then as a thank you, you'll also get our free guide to our favourite apps that we use on the water and which helps to keep us safe and informed. And you can subscribe by heading over to our website, supfmpodcast.com. This week, we are very proud to feature someone who I spoke to back in February and who at that time was just ramping up to his last couple of months of training before setting out on his epic trip around the coast of mainland Britain. I'm not sure if the British still have a reputation for being mild-mannered and polite, but those characteristics could not be applied to our coastline, which is wild, rugged, and battered by weather and winds, and that even applies in the summer. And this year, Brendon Prince completed his objective and is now the first person to paddle a full circumnavigation of the island on a paddleboard. While a lot of adventurers out there are fired by just being the first to do something, Brendon has a higher purpose, which is what he's raising money for, to stop people drowning. And you can hear him talking about it with some real emotion in this episode. And yes, this episode is about a UK-based initiative, but that aside, there is no reason why the app that he's raising money to develop can be just as useful across other countries to help reduce drowning and improve water safety across the world. So if you are listening from any of the 94 countries worldwide who download our episodes, then please donate what you can over at thelongpaddle.co.uk and click on sponsorship to give to his educational app project. And like always, links are in the show notes. So that's quite enough of me talking. Here is the ever impressive and the record-breaking Brendon Prince. Hey Brendon, welcome back to SUP FM.
Oh, it's fantastic to be here and speak to you, Simon. Absolute pleasure.
Well, it's been literally an epic journey since we last spoke back in February. And this year you've become the first person to paddleboard the coast of mainland Britain. And you've broken a whole number of records in the process. And you've been followed all the way around by certainly British and an international audience. All I can say really is massive congratulations.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm humbled by the amount of support that I've received, and also it's all about a team. Yes, you've just, pointed the direction at me, but there's so many other people that have played a part in making this happen for me. So just humbled by the whole experience and just pleased that, when you said last time we talked was February, and that just seems like a long time ago. A lot of water has gone under the bridge since then, for sure.
It absolutely has, and we'll discuss some of that water in a second. But first of all, your reflections, because I think it's a couple of weeks, is it almost 3 weeks now, when you came ashore in Torquay, and it has been an absolute whirlwind for you. I've seen you popping up all over the place, and I've had friends and family saying, "Oh, have you heard about this guy who's just paddleboarded around the UK?" And I was saying, "Don't you listen to my podcast?"
Quite
Yeah,
right.
your feet couldn't have touched the ground since you got back. Tell us about some of the interviews and the interest that you've had since you've arrived back in Torquay.
Well, do you know what? The whole point of doing this was to get this media attention so that I can spread the water safety message, get people thinking about it. My wildest dreams were perhaps somewhere else in Europe, not just in Britain, but the last 2 weeks have just been amazing. I've had interviews from all corners of the planet, and I've had such fun interviews. I've had in-depth interviews. I've had, what I would call quite tabloidy interviews, to the real genuine interviews. Just before I came on here, I did an interview for a GCSE student who wanted his media, add something to his media project. Everything from the sublime to the ridiculous. And it's been fun. It's been fun, and I've enjoyed it. And I've, just like the paddle, I think if you have a smile on your face with these things, you get so much more out of it. And and talking to you has been something I've been looking forward to because of the way we started the journey talking to you. And it kind of gives it a bit of closure in a way of this section of the journey.
Well, that's very generous of you, and particularly highlights for me. Persuaded your wife to join you, didn't you, on that BBC interview?
That was funny because with a lot of these interviews, it's a case of now we need it now, and that particular one, I think they phoned me at about 3:00 and wanted me to jump on a train at 5. So I said, well, I'm only going to do it if my wife's going to be there because I've been away from her for so long. There's no way I'm going to disappear for 48 hours now. So they very kindly said, actually, well, we'd love to have her on the sofa as well. So, it was fun. It was fun. The interview itself, I think, was curtailed and cut short, as often these things can be. But just to get our faces on there has helped other people to recognize us and want to talk to us, and other medias as well. So very worthwhile and crazy at the same time.
I hope you made the full use of the room service when you went up there as well. So maybe this isn't the right place to start, but I definitely had a little bit of dust in my eye when I watched the SUP Junkie coverage of you coming ashore in Torquay. I mean, it couldn't have been a better homecoming, could it? Because it was perfect, flat water, beautiful blue sky, amazing place, Torquay, where you came ashore with a line of paddleboarders just sort of fanned out behind you. How did that feel when you finally stepped onto the sand down there at Torquay and you saw the crowd?
Yeah, well, I mean, you summed it up beautifully there, Simon. I couldn't have wished for a better conditions, better weather, and the volume of support both on the water with paddlers and on the beach with supporters. It was a surreal experience, and as you can imagine, I felt like I was floating above the water when I was coming in. And I've dreamt about that moment of just hitting the red sand of Torquay and stepping onto it. And it was a powerful moment in my personal life, and something I'll always have with me. And if I can channel that power from that moment, because I think you're very special to receive just one of those moments in your life, and I feel very blessed that was my moment and how I can now move on with it. But yeah, it's really hard to articulate, really. Those emotions and those feelings, and really it's lasted the last 2 weeks, because everybody I've seen, it's the first time they've seen me, so they want to have a proper chat, and that's just lovely. And the things like using a bathroom in my own home, sleeping in my bed, all these firsts that I haven't done. It's very, very just magical, really, just magical.
And then just to finish off this homecoming, I guess you won't ever have to buy a pint again, certainly not in the rugby club. And I understand you went for a cup of tea afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, the Torquay Rugby Club were just brilliant. It's right on the seafront, and they welcomed us with open arms to come across there and just have a bit of a night afterwards. So I had to be careful because after 3 or 4 pints, I was, as you can imagine, hadn't really prepared for those pints. So had to take it steady on that night. But it was just so awesome to see everybody in that environment with our feet firmly on land and just reveling in the fact that, you know, this had been achieved, and as a team we'd done this, and we were home.
As you mentioned, we're kind of bookending this experience. Obviously, you've still got more things to produce and to help raise money. And we'll talk about what you're raising money for in a second. But last time we spoke, you were in the final phases of your training, or I suppose just before the ramp up. And we talked a lot about Ross Edgley and the advice that he gave you about sort of staying uncomfortable throughout, not getting too comfortable. But now you're in the situation where you've done it. You, like Ross Edgley, have gone around the coast of Britain. You've circumnavigated it. If you were thinking back to those times and you were giving yourself advice before you started off, what would that advice be? What have you learned?
Well, do you know what? I always say you should praise someone before you ever give them some bad news or critique. So, you know, I would say to myself, a pat on my back for the 4 months of training I did, because that was invaluable. To hit the ground running meant that physically that wasn't a burden. It wasn't the hardship that perhaps others were thinking it would be, because I knew that the burden, the hardship would be the mental aspect. And I didn't really know how that was going to be. So, because, you know, I trained, and my biggest training paddles were sort of 6 or 7 hours. And then straight away I'm going into averaging 10-hour paddle days. And, you know, you don't really know how that's going to work in your head. And it took 2 weeks. It took 2 weeks to really get around what became quite simple at the end. I reveled in 10, 12 hours of being on my own, and the entertainment and how I entertained myself was something that I learned to do. But it wasn't easy to start with. It wasn't. The mind, as we know, can be a dangerous thing if you leave it to its own devices. So you have to keep it busy, you have to keep it positive. And one way I did that was the never whining about anything. You know, even if you had a terrible night's sleep, or you didn't like that food, or, you know, you just get on with it. You don't whine about it. You just put a smile on your face and you get on with it. And that became quite a self-fulfillment, really, in that you just smile about things. And that actually then came across when I was on the water, and when bad things happened, you just smiled about it. And when you've got a smile on your face, you can kind of defeat and go up against anything. So, you know, I'm not talking about, you know, I wasn't a laughing fool, but just a smile about a quiet confidence in the fact that, well, this isn't great, but you know what? I can overcome this, and I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to bitch and whine about it. You just get on with it. And so, yeah, I think, answering your question, what would I say to myself? Do you know what? It went incredibly well. And perhaps I'd say to myself to put some more warm clothes in the bags, because I didn't really experience any summer whilst paddling. But other than that, it went incredibly well. And I think that's a lot to do with planning, but also being blessed in what we were trying to achieve.
And it really helps when you've got that positive mindset, doesn't it? Because, you know, you get whatever you concentrate on. So, you know, if you spend a lot of time complaining, then that just makes you feel bad. There's no point in doing that, particularly if you're doing what you're doing. So I don't know, maybe a couple of extra air fresheners for the van. I don't know what that was like, sleeping with with blokes in damp, sweaty kit. I can't imagine that, but that was probably part of the mental journey. But really interesting you said about the mental journey, because you're setting off on a really long journey, and sometimes it can be quite intimidating, particularly when you've gone through those first few days and those first sort of flushes of enthusiasm. Were there any days that you just didn't fancy paddling?
Yeah, well, it's. I think what you do realize very quickly is you have a personal scale. So you've kept it very black and white there and said, was there a day that you don't want to paddle, or meaning that most days you do want to paddle? And I think all of a sudden you get this kind of scale. And for me, the scale was 1 to 20, and anything above 18, in my opinion, was pretty dangerous, in that I think it would take my life. So you kind of gauged this system, and if a paddle day was a 16 or 17, it was going to be a bad paddle day. But do you know what? Especially with my own ability growing through the course of the adventure, it just meant that you could give it a go in a way that, and still feel safe and still feel confident for those paddles. So yeah, of course there were days that I thought, really, am I actually going to paddle in this day? Am I really going to, crack out through this swell, let alone then paddle beyond it? But there's always that voice that says to you, well, if you don't do it today, you've only got to do it tomorrow. No one is going to jump in and say, I'll paddle this bit for you. It's always there. And that was something that took a few weeks to get used to that. And it seems the most obvious thing. Of course, I'm the one paddling. But, if you close your eyes and hide in your bunk in the van, it's still going to be there when you come out. There's no escaping from it. And at no point was I not going to achieve this challenge. So that meant you just got to get on with it. You just had to get on with it.
And that talks to something that we discussed back in February, which is just taking those miles where you can. It's all about that forward progress.
Yeah, that's a really good point, in that some days you think, well, I just want to get 40K, 50K, 60K. But actually the 2K days, of which there were plenty, were just as powerful, were just as an achievement, and meant that I didn't have to do those 2K again. So you are always moving forward, and that's such a big thing when you're doing a big endurance event. As long as you're always moving forward, you're always making ground, and you're always that one step closer, or one paddle closer to the finish.
One of the things that we talked about previously, as I said, was taking every mile. But I just wonder how disciplined you were in terms of those extreme miles. Were there any occasions where you could have gone further and limited it just because you knew that otherwise you would potentially blow out the following day?
Yeah, I would think at the start, the first month, I was a bit more cautious. I didn't want an injury. And as you well know, you can paddle for 10 hours in moderate conditions, and when you're doing this day in day out, the next day is not a problem. You don't even feel sore. You just get on with it. But you can paddle for 20 minutes in the worst of conditions and feel terrible the next day because your body has been ruined in those 20 minutes. So I had to really be careful. In that first month, I didn't want an injury. I didn't want to damage the board. I was probably a little bit more cautious. And then for me, I'm weighing that up against, actually, the first month was some terrible weather in the southwest. So was it the weather or was it my being a little bit more cautious than I was later on? I know if myself now went back to that first month, I probably would have paddled a bit harder and a bit longer in some of those conditions. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, and you grow in an adventure, and then you grow to be able to go on to the next adventure. So every day was a learning day, and just exciting at the same time.
Absolutely. Every day is a school day. And your journey seemed like a game of two halves, because it took you quite some time because of the weather to get up to the north coast of Scotland, and then you absolutely flew down. Was that how it seemed to you?
Yeah, it's funny how we all have different views on it. And the start for me was brutal. Wales was just sweet. It just clicked. Going around Wales and getting around in 14 days was just brilliant. And then it slowed up again in the northwest before getting into Scotland. And then once we were in Scotland, it just took the whole atmosphere of it just took a very different turn. And I got around Scotland in 46 days, which I'm incredibly proud of. It's for me, this whole thing is fantastic. But if someone was to say, what were you most proud of from that? It's getting around Scotland in 46 days, because some of those conditions were off the scale. And that's the times where I knew I had to paddle as hard as I could for 3 days, because that weather was going to change on that fourth day. And if I didn't get there, I didn't get to that gate, that might have held me up for weeks. And I never had that in Scotland. I had 2 days off because of bad weather, not being able to paddle at all in the whole trip. There were plenty of days where I could only get 2 or 5 or 10K in, but even those were big achievements in relation to just those insane conditions and, the headlands and the wildlife and the wind and, everything's kind of against you really, when it shouldn't be in the summer. So heaven knows what it's like through those winter months.
Well, absolutely. And that brings us of mind of Jordan Wiley and braving those waters up in north coast of Scotland round about December. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for him.
Oh, absolutely. And I've spoken to Jordan so much about it and just said, mate, I don't know whether to call you crazy or just respect you for it, because but not just the weather, it's the way it changes through the winter. There's a predictability to a certain degree at more moderate months, which just isn't there in the winter months. And, if you're ever going to do a challenge like this, you have to have, a paddling ability. But I would wager that actually your ability to read the weather and to read the water is just as important, if not more important. And up there, you have to be able to read it, to be able to change what you're doing within 15 minutes, because it can go from one extreme to another in that shorter time. So, through the months of winter, yeah, that's just bonkers. I mean, he had the benefit of a boat with him in a way that I just couldn't. I mean, some of the landings, the surf landings I had to do because I was going from beach to beach, were just about acceptable with the rocks and the swell and everything else. So there's no way you could have done that in the winter months. Just no way.
So tell me about the west coast of Scotland, because it's an area that I spent a large amount of time, and there are some real natural hazards there. I know there's Corrie Vrecken, which we chatted about when I saw you on the beach down here. How close did you actually get to that?
Yeah, so Corrie Vrecken is a great one, and it's that whole region, because there are lots of little islands between all the big islands. Now, Corrie Vrecken, it all happens because of the 2 islands, and it all swirling once against each other. But there are whirlpools everywhere, and to watch a whirlpool suddenly form is a crazily scary, amazing thing to see. And in that whole region, up to Oban, the tidal flow, quite easily averaging 30K an hour through some of that tidal flow, some of the speeds you're getting. But again, to be able to read the water and understand that up there's no slack tide, and actually slack tide can be quite dangerous. At least with a tide going one way or the other, you know what's happening, you know where it's going to take you. The way the high tides, you can get 4 high tides in a 24-hour period because of the way the water moves between the islands. You've got to understand that water and work with it, because there's no way you're working against it. And the standing waves, I laugh that I'm going to put together a top 20 list of the most dangerous, gnarly standing waves, because again, a smile on your face sometimes when you come around a headland and you see what's ahead of you. And more importantly, there's no getting out. There is no get out. You might have 20k to go back one way and 20k ahead of you. There is no get out. So you have to suck it up and ride those conditions and understand that your ability can, your kit can, and you can just get through it. But yeah, Curry Reckon's the one that everyone mentions, but there are lots of others around the west coast of Scotland and other parts of Britain to deal with for sure.
And just to talk about the ability to read water. So you were an experienced waterman when you set out, but you definitely added to your skills on the water. And since you've come back, you went to a talk by a friend of the show and quite inspirational modeler for the ability to read water, Tristan Gooley. How was that evening?
Oh, great. I mean, there aren't many people that I, respect beyond sort of human level. And Tristan is one of those, just because what he's taught me through his books. I mean, I've digested those books, every single detail, and put it into practice and compared it against other notes. And what Tristan has done with his books, he's compiled it all for you. Whereas, I've got 50 books on water movement that are conglomerated with his book. And that's why he's so amazing, because he has that ability to just put it across so easily. And it's a phenomenal skill. And I mean, in one of his books, he says about native people being able to literally shut their eyes and feel what the water's doing in certain ways. And you read that and you think, really? Can people really do that? I'm not saying I'm anywhere near that level, but I do have an ability to just look at the water, feel the water, just put your legs in the water for 30 seconds to stop paddling and just really feel, because there's water moving in both directions pretty much all the time. Even when the tide's with you or against you, you can find those counter currents. You can find the way warm water in amongst cooler water that's moving in a direction is moving in another direction. And by using this, you can combat, there are places in west of Scotland that you've only got 4.5, 5 hours of tidal movement. And yet to actually paddle that, because there's no way of getting out, will take you 8 hours. So what you're going to do, because there's nowhere to get out and rest while the tide turns. So you have to look for where those movements are. Because if water's moving in one direction, it has to move from another direction to fill the gap that big movement is making. So you're constantly looking for that. And the likes of Tristan's book is just, over the years that I've studied what he's written, and others are invaluable and such an important part to this type of paddling. And this is one of my personal challenges now, to go to other places on this planet to see how water movement is different, because it's different around this country alone. And this 4,000 kilometers that go around, it's different in Scotland to it is going down the Channel, the English Channel, the Irish Sea, the Atlantic, the North Sea. It's all so completely different, but wonderful. And I love that. That's, for me, was the exciting bit. Reading the weather and reading the water, the flow was a big part of keeping myself entertained every day and motivated every day.
You must be an absolute ninja on that. And for those of us, who haven't spent the concentrated time on the water that you have, it is really quite odd how quickly you can get to really feel the water. And I was starting my paddleboarding journey 10 years ago, and I was on a lake and a pleasure boat came past, and it destabilized me because of the 2-inch wake that it was throwing up. And now the ability to just function on water, whatever direction the waves are coming in. It's incredible how your body can adapt and feel and sense which direction water's going, and how you can tune in your body to that sort of movement. It really is quite amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So in terms of working your way up there, you had a few days, I guess, at various times on shore, just because the weather was so awful. Did you manage to spend time in the local community? Did you get some hospitality, and did you get away from the van at all during that period?
Phenomenally so. I always felt it was really important that you look at the conditions, you understand what's going on, and then you make a call on it. So if it's bad, right, it's going to be bad. There's no point in standing and watching this every half an hour thinking, can I go? Can I go? Can I not go? Can I go? Because that doesn't do the body or mind any good at all. So that's exactly what we did. We say, right, we are not paddling today because it's too bad, and we're going to engage with the local, people, community. So, on a day off, I went and taught in a school, a couple of hours teaching water safety to a whole school in Cornwall. I had things like a golf lesson in Scotland, because that's what you do in Scotland. There's so much golf going on. There was so much we did that was really important to just take your mind away from the impending because often if it was a bad weather day, we had it off. You knew the next day it very rarely just cleared up and was beautiful. It meant that tomorrow was going to be bad, but not as bad as today. So, you mentally prepare yourself by going and doing something completely different and staying with the people we stayed with, interacting with amazing people around this fantastic island. And I love that because we are so different. The island people of Scotland are completely different, but obviously the same. The people of the northwest, the people of the northeast, the people of the south, we've all got so much to contribute. And the coastal environment, I think, is an incredibly friendly environment. And they've all got so much to contribute to what I was doing, and the advice and help that they were giving. Although I must admit, everybody thinks that their headland is the gnarliest, and that's not always the case. But yeah, to engage with them, to listen to what they have to say, and just, share a drink with them, share some food with them. It's a part of the adventure journey.
So you spoke about going and teaching a class on water safety, and obviously that's the whole reason why you set out on your journey. And for those of our listeners who haven't heard your story as to what really sort of catapulted you into this campaigning role and raising money and delivering all of this water safety training, just tell us a bit about that experience that really changed your life.
Well, I think to sum it up, because I do find it hard to go into detail of it. So just to really sum it up, I spent 35 years on the water, from the first time I actually taught something on the water to 25 years of teaching, as a classroom teacher and a head of outdoor education, to surf lifesaving teacher, lifeguard teacher, stand-up paddleboard, open water swimming, all those sailing, all those elements. And within all of that and my lifeguarding, to be brutally honest, I've seen too many people die. And when that happens, it changes you as a person. And the only way I could deal with that, and it's not so much the actual seeing the graphics of it, but it's seeing the effects that happens to their families. That's the big one. And I said to myself, I can't stand by and let another family go through that again and see that. So, you know what? I changed my life, and to the point that I gave up teaching 2 years ago now, and to give just, if that one child takes that message on board and grows up with that message to be able to tell others and their own children, on an island where we're pretty darn clueless about water safety and drowning prevention. That's my mission. And I wanted, I've tried everything. Going into to schools, creating books, creating worksheet, everything you could possibly imagine. But it's the 21st century. So, all of that really is got to be channeled into an app, something that is absolutely cutting edge. But unfortunately, these things cost lots of money. So how else could I get this money? How else could I get people to listen to me talking about water safety and then think, well, actually, I might give a quid, or I might give in a company's, £5,000, which a company gave this week. The only way I was going to do that was to do a big kind of what people think is a crazy thing, which is something I love because I think it's one of the best ways to see water, and that's paddleboard around our island. So that was the gist of it. And the next 6 months are such an important part of the journey of creating the money for the app, putting the app, properly out there, ready for next September's start of the academic year.
So I think it's worth getting into the detail of this app, because people hear, all about technology and kids engage with technology, but there's a real reason why an app is more effective. And, it's all about making it fun and building in all of those sort of behavioral elements that makes kids engage with it. It's not the technology itself. It's the ability to win badges. It's the ability to see stories being acted out on the app, isn't it? It's about engaging people in a way that they can actually do something. They can take action. They can gain things. They can gain badges or whatever on the app. And that's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, if I give one example, one of the games, probably the easiest to explain, is the game on RIP. So you can choose your beach. So it might be your local beach. And the idea is that eventually we'll have hundreds of beaches that you can choose. So your local beach. And there it is in front of you in the game. And this is something I used to do with kids when I took them to the beach. We'd say, right, there's 20 Frisbees. You've got a Frisbee each. Throw the Frisbee into where you think the rip is along this beach. And that's the game. So actually your avatar is standing in front of the beach that could be your local beach. You've got 20 Frisbees and you've got to fling them into where you think the rip is. And obviously then the Frisbees are floating as well. So there's a bit of evidence to prove what you're doing is right or wrong. And you've got 20, 30 seconds to throw these Frisbees to gain the points. And then obviously the next day or you're going to try and beat it, or you can actually challenge your mate to try and beat your score. And that's only part of the RIP kind of teaching. And apps that kind of just say, right, this is a RIP and this is what you look for. Kids are going to lose interest in the same way they would in any other medium. But by playing the game, they don't actually know. They're learning about what a RIP looks like and where it's going to be and how it's going to form, and how you've got, standard fixed rips or you've got flash rips. What are the difference? And understanding that. And then the next part of that game is actually you're in the rip. What are you going to do to stay alive? What are you going to do to get out of the rip? But all gamed. So that's the crux of it. That's why it's never been made before. That's why it costs a lot of money. But it's going to be moduled from an educational point of view. So, children with a class can say, right, well, today we're going to play the first 5 modules. And Miss or Sir might play 10 modules. So they're always one step ahead of the game and can then stop and let's talk about that particular game we just played. And there's also support stuff within the app for teachers to use to give them that heads up and a little bit more information to answer those questions that, kids being kids will definitely ask.
So it's engaging with children how they actually are rather than how we'd like them to be. And I think that will probably be a huge benefit to adults as well, because certainly looking at paddleboarding, some of it is a result of the huge quantities of people out on the water this summer. But there's both a lack of knowledge amongst new people out there, but also there seems to be a reluctance to learn that, or certainly to engage. And, I was telling you, Brendon, when we met on the water here, that the beginners episode that we published 4 episodes right at the beginning of this season. The one that got the least downloads by quite some degree was the safety one. And we try and make sure that it's not grim stuff and that it's interesting, but still it's very, very difficult to engage, which is why I think your app is such an outstanding idea. And it would be great if the paddleboarding community as water users could really get behind you and just put a few quid in just to help you to get it into existence, because it seems to me like an absolute no-brainer.
Well, exactly that. And I'm amazed at certain organizations or haven't done it already. And it's got a lot to do with money, but it's got a lot to do with, the 30 odd years of what I've done has created all the different games, and I've got them all ready to be created. And that's the hardship, because it's got to be relevant, it's got to be teaching, but it's got to be challenging, it's got to be fun, and the games aren't just for the coast, they're for inland waters as well. And you've hit the absolute nail on the head. Pride before a fall, and people aren't willing to come and listen. Or, sometimes on this trip, on this adventure, I would go up to people and say, guys, if you carry on paddling in that direction, one, you're never going to get back. And two, it's going to be dangerous because that wind is going to change any second now. And some of the time it was greeted with, oh, thank you, I really appreciate that. But most of the time it was greeted with gritted teeth. Oh, really? Is this man telling us what we should be doing? And I always try and put it across in the most sympathetic, just helpful way. Just like, guys, this is what's happening. Take it or leave it. It's no drama to me. But we think on this island that we've got this amazing maritime heritage, which we have got. But I think people think it's drip fed through to us, whereas it's not. And you only need to go to a busy beach this summer gone to kind of see some of the ridiculous things that are going on, and the amount of rescues that have happened. It's just off the scale this year, but not just by our amazing RLNI and Coast Guard and other organisations, SLSGB, etc., but also by general people on the beach who have seen people doing things wrong and have been there to help out. Has been off the scale.
Yeah, 100%. And in terms of your fundraising, we'll give you an opportunity to talk about where to refer people, but where could people contribute if they wanted to contribute towards your app?
Well, the website. So on the website, there are two. You can sponsor, which is all towards the app, or you can donate, which goes towards the 7 charities and is gift aided. The reason we can't gift aid the app is because the way it has to, basically, I don't want to put all this energy and money into something that in 2 years' time, doesn't really work, is out of date. It needs to be kept fresh. And the way we want to do that is free to all school children, free to every school. But hopefully 10% of all that free to schools, 10% of the parents will think, well, we'll buy that as well. And we only need about 10% of the parents to spend that $1.99 or 99 pence to actually mean that we can keep it fresh, and we can keep it alive, and we can add more beaches. And we can add beaches around the world. It would be great if we had an app that they can play on the plane, because they're going to that destination as well, and share the wealth of knowledge from other countries. Australia and New Zealand are so far ahead with their water safety teaching, because it's ingrained in their society, let alone their education system. So, bringing that on board as well is all part of what we're trying to achieve, and get the best app together with the most influence to help and be fun. That's the main thing. Children, it has to be fun. And if adults see children having fun playing it, they'll want to give it a go. So that's the general gist of it.
Absolutely. You've got to beat your son or your daughter on the app, haven't you?
Totally.
Okay, so let's talk about the second half of your trip. So I've heard you talking about some wildlife encounters, but you had a really special experience, didn't you?
I presume you're talking about the orcas.
Correct.
Yeah, it's funny. People say, "Oh, that must have been so special. Must have been." I don't know what I would. Terrifying is definitely one word that I would use within it. Kind of life changing. Yeah, I can get all that, but at the same time, I quite happily never have that again. The situation, I had 3 encounters in one evening from orcas, killer whales. The first one was the most shocking, in that it was a dark, bet 8:30, and bearing in mind at that time of the year it gets dark, proper dark, or Scottish dark, at about midnight. So quite often I would be paddling into that sort of time, and it must have been about 8:30, and dank, bit of wind, but quite a bit of sort of that drizzly on the surf zone rain. Visibility wasn't that great, and I'm paddling away, and all of a sudden what I thought was a fishing boat came up behind me. And in one hand I'm thinking, well, how did I not hear that fishing boat? And on the other hand, my body's telling me that is a whale. And it came up with such speed, it had a bow wave ahead of it. And I kind of turned on my board to kind of do a back foot turn into whatever this thing was coming towards me. And I literally just stepped straight off the board. So to my surprise, I'm in the water as this just sheer, massive black and white whale passed the other side of my board. And I remember thinking, do I panic and get on the board, or do I just stay in the water and not panic and just let it cruise past? And I think I was wise to do the latter. I just stayed in the water and it cruised by. And then, I was blown away by the sheer size of it. And I still, now it does wake me up at night occasionally, the sheer size, and the fin comes out of the water like it's huge. So it came past me, and I jumped. I then got back on, and as I'm getting back on my board, one cruised past my feet behind me. And it was a hugely humbling, vulnerable experience. And if ever you thought about you're just a speck on this massive planet, this massive universe, that was the moment that I thought, well, actually, I'm nothing out here. And they're amazing things. And I know they were just coming to just check me out. And they did just that 2 more occasions later. Actually, different whales came to check me out. And on the 3rd time, it was getting 9:45 sort of time and a little bit more duskish. And I actually thought, enough's enough. I need to get off the water now. Because each time they came to me, they were the patterns, the latter ones. I mean, the last time they came to me, one headed straight for me, which I realize now was just to attract my full attention on that one. Because when I thought, well, actually starting to get a bit close now, two came up behind me. So it kind of feels like they're hunting you until they realize that you're a human and not something they can eat. So at that point, that's when I thought, right, do you know what? I'm getting off the water now, and I'm going to leave this experience and hopefully never have it again. But at the same time, yeah, stunning. But I still haven't quite realized the best way to articulate my feelings on it, because it was quite something at the time, quite something.
Mixed emotions, definitely there. You kind of flew down, or at least it seemed to everyone else, or certainly to me, you flew down that east side of the UK, and you had a few long crossings, I guess, the Wash and so on. What were the highlights of that coast? And did you have the same impression that you came down really quickly?
Yeah, I think the difference with the East Coast is there's not lots of ins and outs. So, at the top of Scotland, you've got the big Firth of Forth, and you've got to spend a day or so coming in and a day or so coming out of these things, and to cross in somewhere in between. Whereas on the East Coast, you're just heading south. There's lots of man-made stuff, and that's the point I'll make about nature. Nature you can understand and work with, and cliffs and headlands and firths and all these things you can work with and understand. Estuaries. It's the human impact of harbours and shipping lanes and concrete, rebounding waves, wind farms. All these things make it much more difficult, and that was very apparent on the East Coast. There's lots of wind farms. There's lots of big, gnarly shipping lanes that you have to cross. And yeah, that's where a lot more planning comes in, a lot more time spent on the radio, speaking to boats, a lot more time speaking with the Coast Guard and the shipping lanes themselves in VTS, talking to them and making sure everyone's aware of me and I'm safe and they're safe, and working with them was hugely important part of what I was trying to achieve, to show it can be done with the right level of communication and understanding, and hopefully helping them to understand that I'm not just a clueless stand-up paddleboarder that's going to definitely be in trouble, because all stand-up paddleboarders, when they go offshore, get into trouble. And I was really trying to put that across. And one story I've got which probably epitomizes that is Dover. So Dover is a crazily busy harbour where you've got ferries and container vessels and lorry vessels just flying in and out. And I had a 30-mile-an-hour wind on my back that day with the tide. So I was being taken to Dover very quickly. So I knew I had to hold my ground whilst I communicated again with the harbour master who I'd spoken to earlier that day to pre-warn them and everything. So Dover Control. And Dover Control said, yes, there were two vessels coming in, 2 vessels going out. The name of that last vessel, when you see it go past, that's your set kind of 2 or 3 minute window to get across before the next vessel comes in. So, of course, the 30-mile-an-hour wind is pushing me closer and closer, and I'm fighting it, but not wanting to get too close because the rebound off the walls of Dover was just crazy. And obviously I've got the radio in front of me and I can hear everything that's going on. And a ferry was coming in, big, huge ferry. And only a British captain could kind of sound like this. He said, Dover Control, this is so-and-so ferry. Do you realise there is a paddleboarder just to the side of our shipping lane? And Dover Control came back and said, yes, he's in full communication with us. He's just waiting for you to pass for his window to get across. And I just thought, yeah, that epitomised trying to work with and the view they've got on paddleboarders, but trying to diminish that view and get a better view for paddleboarders, that we can do this. We're only a little vessel, but we are a vessel, and we're trying to do what we're trying to do and make the most of our amazing coastline. So
in that communication aspect, when I was talking to Sian Sykes, who really drummed up a relationship with the various coast guards she had contact with while she went round the coast of Wales, did you drum up any friendships with the local coast guards as you went?
Absolutely, and they talk to each other as well, so they're passing on the information as it goes round, and that kind of grew to the point that one for Dover Coast Guard and Solent Coast Guard, it was incredibly friendly, and they actually, especially on the South Coast, I would get 4 to 5 phone calls whilst I'm paddling. And thankfully I've got a watch that it all comes through on. So it's really easy for me to get a phone call as well as a radio. And the radio's not so great because I've got a shortwave radio. So the headlands interfere with that. So actually phone on the South Coast was much better. And they would ring me and say, Brendon, can we just clarify your position? Because we've had someone else ring up saying there's a paddleboarder 10 miles off the coast and we're just checking it's you. That relationship is hugely important. And, the community, the coastal community is a strong one. And we're all trying to look out for each other and respect and understand and protect each other. So that really came across, especially on the South Coast, where, they'd had all the messages from all the other coast guards and understood what we were doing. Because the first couple of coast guards did think I was a little bit crazy. And I think they didn't really think that I would ever have the ability to paddle around the whole of Britain.
So we're entering the final lap of your journey now, going down the south coast. You passed those shipping lanes in Dover, and it was at that point where, I don't know, the sun shining on the righteous or whatever, but there was an easterly wind, and that really propelled you down. So particularly when you entered, my waters, so you stopped at Portsmouth, didn't you? And that must have felt good because you had a good crew down there welcoming you onto the shore of Southsea.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was funny because the way the weather was on the South Coast, it's so much more predictable. And to have those easterlies was just brilliant. And, 50 to 60K repeatedly day after day, getting some great ground, which meant that actually I had a bit of a half day to come into Portsmouth and make the most of some fab people to meet up with. Met up with SUP Junkie, Shorties, Jordan Wiley, and lots of family and friends, and it was just really good. But of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, perhaps the weather might change. And yeah, it did. So, when I got to Portland, just before Portland, I had 2 days where the weather was just coming from the west and just meant I could get nowhere. Old Harry's Rock was my nemesis for 2 days. I couldn't get around it. It was just way too strong. I mean, coming out of Sandbanks, it took me, what was it, off the top of my head, 6.5 hours to get from Sandbanks to Studland.
Yeah.
Which is not even 5 or 6K.
Yeah.
That was the level of the wind. So I then had 2 days where I couldn't really get anywhere, which meant that it was suddenly a little bit more pressured to get back by the 6 o'clock on a Tuesday. So I just really had to dig deep, and I had 3 massive days, 60K days, to get back by that Tuesday, 6 o'clock. And basically the media, the BBC had said, if you come in at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday, we'll give you national coverage. If you come in on a Wednesday, we might not be able to give you regional coverage. So it was quite important to the mission of what we're trying to do, and added on a bit of pressure for sure. But yeah, I paddled best under pressure.
You certainly did that. And the evening that I met you, just by the Isle of Wight, you had to make that decision, didn't you? You had to crunch the figures. You had to work out when exactly you were going to be coming ashore. So did you build any contingency into that? Did you anticipate that you were going to get held up around Sandbanks and Studland?
Yeah, I mean, you constantly, and this is something that people have said, you must have been exhausted by the time you finished this whole 141 days. And physically, I wasn't exhausted at all, because the body's an amazing thing and it adapts. And I was just happy to paddle like that all day long. But what I was mentally exhausted because of that planning, constantly planning, knowing exactly, I mean, going through the Solent, for example, and out the other end, there's lots of, you've got Portsmouth Royal Harbour to get across, the shipping lane to get across, you've got Southampton to get across, you've got the tidal flow, you've got lots of other ferries at different points, you've got to get out at the right time, and you've got that 5 hour, 45 minute, 6 hour window to be able to do that. So that takes a lot of planning to get it right. And I am, I'm quite meticulous with that, and take great pride in that aspect of my paddling, in that only 3 times did I ever need to exit because it wasn't quite right. That, I didn't hit that. I was meant to be there at 3 minutes past 3, and I got there at 10 past 3 and the tide had turned. So I had to exit, I take great pride over that aspect of it. Of course, the weather can sometimes change that for you, but also it can benefit you in that as well. So big part of it, and love that part of it really. But it does take a huge toll on the mental effort. So yeah, I was glad to kind of see the back of that in a way, and that mental effort to get in for the Tuesday. Yeah, I was fairly exhausted by the end of it really.
And then of course we've already mentioned your glorious homecoming on Tor Abbey Sands, which I remember because I'm ancient. The Radio 1 Roadshow always coming from there. But yeah, first time I'd ever seen it. I was too young to attend those, unfortunately. But.
Oh, really? But there's some fond memories of Radio 1 roadshows in Tor Bay for sure.
Just to mention your support crew, you mentioned earlier on Harry, Will, and you also had a team who organised your accommodation on the way through, and you had a really good setup for that. Just tell us a bit about the crew that just helped you on a daily basis just to keep that forward progress.
So the awesome long paddle team. So it really started with Harry being my kind of did everything for me, from carrying my board when you've been paddling for 12 hours, to be able to have someone who would just pick that board up for you for that walk up the beach meant a lot. But he would cook the food and just the general logistics and sort it. And then Will doing the same, but Will was in charge then of all the photography and getting all those amazing images that he achieved. So they were the on the ground crew who were just amazing in the likes of Scotland, where they had to leapfrog to kind of find where I was and just check I was okay. And we'd go full days or 2 days without seeing them sometimes, but would always be there at the best place and find the best place for me. And one important thing they did was just spotting, in that if I was coming in on a gnarly swell, if I've never surfed in on a beach before, it's really hard to be able to see the best way to come in. So just using signals to give me the best line in to surf in was just, so essential. And then the two girls back in Torquay, Zoe, who was always answering the phones and just passing messages on to us and just working those messages out, whether they needed to come to us or she could sort them out, was fantastic. And then Lucy's got some of the best gift of the gab out there. So she would just phone all the local campsites or wherever and just say, and we were going to actually record her spiel and play it out there, because it is quite impressive. She's good at it. And she would always get somewhere for us. And, some of the most amazing campsites we stayed at, often we'd literally roll in at 10 o'clock at night, have a shower, because that was just amazing to be able to have a shower, because most of the time I was just having bucket showers up in Scotland. And then you'd be rolling out again at 5 in the morning. So you'd hardly be there. But just to have that facility was fantastic. So, those guys played such an important part, as did the people that came and met me and helped me when we were going around to see family and friends at the most amazing places, just to give me that one night of encouragement and spurring on. Plays a big part in creating the team that achieved the long paddle.
So you don't miss sleeping in a damp van with two guys then?
Do you know what? Surprisingly good night's sleep. You kind of got just used to it, really. But as you say, that it's the damp and the cold. My bed is much nicer for sure.
Just an awesome achievement. And, speaking personally, it's been fantastic to follow you all the way around. You haven't mentioned it so far, but I think me sending you the British Lions scores for the first test probably helped you on that particular day. It was a pretty abject performance by the Lions throughout. So
but do you know what? I was paddling, and I couldn't obviously have that afternoon off just to watch the Lions. The conditions were paddling conditions, and to have those messages coming through, pinging on my watch, and it would be like they've just scored or a penalty or whatever was phenomenal. And that adds to the whole thing, Simon. So you really did play a part to that. And I appreciate it, even though the Lions were fairly shocking this time round.
Well, there's so few rugby players out there. I've got to take my conversations where I can. So glad to been at help. So just before we finish off, and then obviously you share the details again, about where people can contact you, where people can make a contribution. Let's just, for the record, state the records that you achieved during your paddle.
Right. So, they're all going to be officially looked at, got all the files that we've got from it. So, starting at the first person to circumnavigate Scotland, and 46 days to do that. There is a record of 14 days to get around Wales, and we're just looking into seeing if anyone's done it quicker than that. The first person to paddle from Land's End to John O'Groats via the coast, staying on the coast all the way. So that's a record. The longest ever SUP journey, and that's the difficult one to clarify, and that's why it's taken a couple of weeks, because every kilometre has to be verified and checked, and everywhere it crossed over. So there isn't an inch of that. And that's going to be around 4,000 kilometres, which is 1,500 kilometres further than the previous record. And the final one is the circumnavigation of Britain, doing that in 141 days. And again, that needs to be checked through and verified. And so it's some exciting stuff. And the world media love that aspect, and then want to talk to me about the water safety and everything else. They love that kind of the world record bit. And so much of the world media has then asked me, well, are you going to come and paddle around Australia? I've had that. I've had paddle around Vancouver Island. I've had paddle around New Zealand. I've had paddle from most places you can think of. Some are fairly sublime and some are fairly ridiculous.
Mm. And tempted by any of those offers?
A few. Who knows what might happen next year?
I hear Mauritius is very nice.
It's funny. My wife said exactly the same thing.
Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for your time, Brendon. We've really, really enjoyed following you. And this is not over. I understand that you're putting quite a few materials together to give the real skinny on the trip. I understand there's a book in prospect, and I think Will's putting something together as well, isn't he?
Yep. So there's a book and there's the documentary that will go with it. And the idea is that will give us greater momentum then over this next sort of six months to have a push again for the app and everything we're trying to achieve for that, and get more funds. The more funds we get, the better it will be. This app, the more, little things like the better level of noise that the app creates. It all costs money to create these noises and have good sound on an app. So, there's so much to be done. The next 6 months are vital, and I hope we can spark more interest, as I say, with the book and the app, because I've got so many stories from this amazing adventure, and to put those down in black and white is just a fab thing to be able to do, and a great memory for me. So looking forward to all those parts of this second part of the journey, really. It's still continuing.
So just remind me where people can offer their support for you and to contribute to the app and your fundraising.
Well, of course, I'm open to anybody contacting me. So the normal channels through contacting, you can go through the social media. So we're on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and you can personal message me from those, and I'll endeavor to get back to you as quick as possible. But on our website, www.thelongpaddle.co.uk, thelongpaddle.co.uk. You can contact us through there, or indeed you can either sponsor, which is the money that goes to the app, or you can donate, which will go to the charities. And if you do donate, don't forget, please, to gift aid, get a bit more money for those are but my 7 chosen charities from this endeavor. So message at any point. I'm very open to just a chat, and I've had some fabulous chats with people over the last couple of weeks. So just reach out. I'm up for that for sure.
Thanks so much for your time, Brendon. And this shouldn't be the last word, but, thanks also to your family, and particularly your wife. They must have been the most incredible support, and obviously very excited about you coming back. So thanks for sharing your experience with us. Look forward to the book and the documentary. Take care, and hopefully I'll see you on the water again and maybe share another beer.
Simon, absolutely, God bless you. And I just thank you for what you do, because you're sharing the message, and that's so important. So I'm really grateful, my friend, really grateful.
Well, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that interview with Brendon Prince. I really admire positivity in the face of adversity, and Brendon's method of being grateful and developing that habit daily is something I really want to work on. All the links are in the show notes, so if you want to contribute to Brendon's app, then that's where you look. As ever, I really appreciate your amazing support for the podcast and for your love of the sport that we all share. So until next week, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the water.